Hatchet Chapter 12. The fish spear didn't work. He stood in the shallows and waited, and again, small fish came closer and closer, and he lunged at them time after time, but was always too slow. He tried throwing it, jabbing it, everything but flailing with it, and it didn't work. The fish were just too fast. He had been so sure, so absolutely certain that it would work the night before. Sitting by the fire, he had taken the willow and carefully peeled it along the bark until he had a straight staff about 6 feet long, just under an inch at the base, the thickest end. Then, propping the hatchet in a crack in the rock wall, he pulled the head of the spear against it, carving a thin piece off each time until the thick end tapered down to a needle point. Still not satisfied, he could imagine hitting one of the fish with a single point. He carefully used the hatchet to split the point up the middle forward 8 to 10 inches, and jammed a piece of wood up into the split to make a 2-pronged spear with points about 2 inches apart. It was crude, but it looked effective and seemed to have good balance when he stood in the shelter and hefted the spear. He had worked on the fish spear until it became more than a tool. He'd spent hours and hours on it, and now it didn't work. He moved into the shallows and stood, and the fish came to him, and just before they swam around his legs, some of them almost 6 inches long. No matter how he tried, they were too fast. At first he tried throwing it, but that had no chance. As soon as he brought his arm back, well before he threw, the movement frightened them. He had tried lunging at them, having the spear ready just above the water and thrusting it. Finally, he actually put the spear in the water and waited till the fish were right in front of it. But somehow he telegraphed the motion before he thrust it in a way they saw it and flashed away. He needed something to spring the spear forward, some way to move it faster than the fish, some motive force, a string that snapped, or a bow and arrow, a thin, long arrow with the point in the water and the bow back so that he was able to release. Yes, that was it. He had to invent, quote unquote, an arrow, and he almost laughed as he moved out of the water and put his shoes on. The morning sun was getting hot, and he took his shirt off. Maybe this was how it really happened. Way back when, some primitive man tried to spear a fish, and it didn't work, and he invented a bow and arrow. Maybe it was always that way. Discoveries happen because they need to happen. He had not eaten anything this morning, so he took a moment to dig up an egg and eat one, and he reburied them, banked the fire with a couple of thicker pieces of wood, and settled the hatchet on his belt, and took the spear in his right hand and set up on the lake to find wood to make a bow. He went without his shirt, but something about the wood smell on him kept the insects from bothering him as he walked on to the berry patch. The raspberries were starting to become overripe. Just in 2 days, he would have to pick as many as possible after he found the wood, but he did take a little time now to pick a few and eat them. They were full and sweet, and when he picked one, 2 others would fall off the limbs into the grass, and as soon as his hands and cheeks were covered with red berry juice, and he was full. That surprised him, being full. He hadn't thought he would ever feel full again. He only knew hunger, but here he was full. 1 turtle egg and a few handfuls of berries, and he felt full. He looked down at his stomach and saw that it was caved in. It did not bulge out as if it would if he'd had 2 hamburgers and a freezy slush. It must have shrunk. There was still hunger there, but not like it was, not tearing at him. This was the hunger he knew would always, even if he had food, a hunger that made him look for things, see things, a hunger that made him hunt. He swung his eyes across the berries to make sure the bear wasn't there at his back. Then he moved down to the lake. The spear went out before him automatically, moving the brush away from his face as he walked. When he When he came to the water's edge, he swung left, not sure what he was looking for, not knowing what wood might be best for a bow. He had never made a bow, never shot a bow in his life, but it seemed it would be along the lake, near the water. He saw some young birch, and they were springy, but they lacked the snap somehow, as did the willow. Not enough whipback. Halfway up the lake, and just as he started to step over a log, he was absolutely terrified by an explosion under his feet. Something like a feathered bomb blew up, and in a flurry of leaves and thunder, it frightened him so badly that he fell back down and it was gone, leaving only an image in his mind. A bird, it had been, about the size of a very small chicken, only with a fantail and stubby wings that slammed against his body, made that loud noise that was gone. He got up and brushed himself off. The bird had been speckled, brown and gray, and it must not be very smart because Brian's foot was nearly on it before it flew. Half a second more and he would have stepped on it and caught it, he thought, and eaten it. He might be able to catch one or spear one. Maybe he thought maybe it tasted like chicken. Maybe he could catch one or spear one, and probably did taste just like chicken when his mother baked it in the oven with garlic and salt and turned a golden brown and cracked. He shook his head to drive the picture out and moved down to the shore. There was a tree down there with long branches that seemed straight, and when he pulled on one of them and let it go, it had an almost vicious snap to it. He picked one of the limbs that seemed right and began chopping where the limb joined the tree. The wood was hard, and he didn't want to cause it to split because this took time. Took small chips and concentrated so hard at it. First, he didn't hear it. A persistent whine, like insects, only more steady with the edge of a roar to it. There was an edge of a roar to it. He was in his ears, and he chopped and cut and was now thinking of the bow, how he would make the bow, how it would be when he shaped it with a hatchet, and still the sound did not cut through until the limb was nearly off the tree, and the whine inside his head, and he knew it, a plane. It was a motor, far off, but seeming to get louder. They were coming for him. He threw down the limb and the spear, and holding the hatchet, he started to run for camp. He had to get up the bluff and signal them, get the fire and smoke up. He put all of his life into his legs, jumped logs, and moved through the brush like a ghost, swiveling and running, his legs filling and blowing, and now the sound was louder, coming in his direction. If not right at him, at least closer. He could see it all in his mind now. The picture, the way it would be. He would get the fire going, and the plane would see the smoke and circle once again, then again, and waggle its wings. It would be a float plane, and it would land on the water and come across a lake, and the pilot would be amazed he was alive after all these days. All this he saw as he ran for camp and the fire. They would take him from here, and this very night, he would sit with his father and eat and tell him all the things. He could see it now. Oh yes, as he ran in the sun, his legs liquid springs. He got to the camp, still hearing the whine of the engine, and one stick of wood still alit with a good flame. He drove inside and grabbed the wood and ran around the edge of the ridge, scrambled up like a cat, and blew and nearly had a flame feeding, growing, and the sound moved away. It was abrupt, as if the plane had turned, and he shielded the sun for his eyes and tried to see it, tried to make the plane become real in his eyes, but the trees were so high, so thick, and now the sound was fainter. He kneeled again, and the flames, kneeling into the flames, and blew the grass and chips, and the flames fed and grew. In moments he had a bonfire as high as his head, but the sound was gone now. Look back, he thought. Look back and see the smoke. Please, now, and turn. Please turn. Look back, he whispered, feeling the pictures fade, seeing his father's face fade like the sound. He lost dreams, like an end to hope. Oh, turn now, come back. Look back and see the smoke, and turn for me. But it kept moving away until he could not hear it, even his imagination, in his soul, gone. He stood on the bluff over the lake, his face cooking in the roasting bonfire, watching the clouds of ash and smoke going into the sky, and thought no more thought. He even knew then he would not be able to get out of this place. Not now, not ever. That had been a search plane. He was sure of it. That must have been them, and they'd come from as far off the side of the flight plan as they thought they would have to come, and then turn back. They did not see a smoke. They did not hear the cry from his mind. They would not return. He would never leave now and never get out of here. He went down to his knees and felt tears start, cutting through the smoke and ash on his face, silently falling onto the stone. Gone, he thought finally. All is gone. All silly and gone. No bows, no spears or berries. It was all silly. It was just a game. He could do a day, but not forever. He could not make it if they could not come for him somehow. He could not play the game without hope. He could not learn the game. He could not play the game without a dream. They had taken that away from him now. They had turned away from him, and there was nothing for him now. The plane was gone, his family gone, all of it gone. They would not come for him. He was alone, and there was nothing for him.